Hello. Hi. Oh, that's good. Okay, so my name's Diane Parker, and I'm a grief and results coach, and I'm based in the Isle of Man. I started my journey back in the 90s, 94, when my husband was diagnosed with Hep C because he was a haemophiliac. And it changed my life into a coaching life. And then when he died in 2016, I discovered the grief recovery method in between losing him and the diagnosis of my little sister who died the following year. So today I'm going to see if I can get this up now onto the thank you very much. I want to share with you a little bit more about that journey because as much as I've done coaching with people and I have dealt with elements of bereavement with people, the actual experience and the pain of that loss were something else. And if I can share with you and for you to pick up anything to take away with today, it would be that for me, I was looking for tools to help me in my healing journey. People talk about grief being a process, and I do not believe that. I believe grief is an emotion. We have processes that we go through to help us at the rough times of grief. But grief, if we come to understand and know what grief is as an emotion, we can be empowered and fear it less. So that's my takeaway for you today, is that you'll have a little bit more understanding about grief in your own life, and then think about how you can take that and use some of the tools that I'll share with you and some thoughts I'll share with you to empower you going forward. My husband died, as I say, in 2016. We'd had to live with this illness, and it, as much as it was difficult, it was also a blessing in disguise because it set me on my coaching path. And in that, I was given tools when I was doing my coaching through NLP and things like that. So when I was going through the early stages of my grief and I was trying to fight depression, I was using those tools to help me get through each and every day, but it was not healing the pain of my loss. I felt like somebody had stuck a knife in my chest and it stayed there until I finished doing and completing the grief recovery training. So I was probably about 6 weeks into my bereavement of my husband before I started really looking for some support and some help, because I did not like the way I was feeling, and I knew it wasn't productive to me as a person. It wasn't who I was or who we were as a family, and I just was looking everywhere. I had a friend of mine who works closely with me, and I had said to her, if there is nothing out there, we are going to put something together, because people like us want to have some kind of like, do this, do this, do this, do this. And then on that journey, we can explore things for ourselves and heal. Anyway, my sister then got the diagnosis, and I had to literally then concentrate on her, even though I was still in the throes of my own grief. My friend fortunately found the course, which was the Grief Recovery Method course. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that course and how I incorporate into what I do with people. What it did do for me was help me heal the pain of my loss in order that I could be in a much better place to help my sister with the end of her life, and also have those conversations with her that most people will try and avoid. So on that note, what I would like you to do is get a pen and paper and just make a few notes. How many losses have you experienced in your life? Now, until I had done the grief recovery method and came to understand this in a much more broader way, we have times in our lives when something will happen and we can feel like yucky. We can't even put a word to it because we're just off. And I've come to learn that the way I explain it to my clients is that when you look at the scale of happiness, you don't just roll around laughing at something. You start with, oh yeah, that's quite funny, or oh yeah, yeah, I get that. Now that's funny. To then starting to laugh and roll around. And grief on the scale similar is very much with obviously a death of a loved one, being absolutely upset, to just feeling off. And so when you reflect now on your own life, how many losses do you know you've had? Now, it's said that we're going to have about 42 losses in our lifetimes. So how many have you actually experienced for yourself? Obviously, death can be one of those ones that we all are very familiar with. If it's not grandparents or parents, it can be animals that we've loved. But the thing is, there's a lot of people that have never even experienced that. But there has been other losses in your life. So if you've made a little quick note there of what you've actually experienced for yourself, let's have a little shufty through the list I've got here for you. These are the more common ones that you'll know of. So obviously we've covered death, divorce. And I can remember a friend of mine who divorced and said, it's like I'm grieving, but without the body. So that just sums that up, doesn't it? Because grief is defined as when we have an end of a familiar pattern of behavior. And grief is the emotion that we do. How much we grieve is just how attached we are to the loss that we've experienced. Again, coming back to that scale, so you understand what that means, is how attached you are to the loss is how much you will actually have that emotion. Another thing too with relationships that fail and divorce, we'll come back to those ones on my next slide. But there's elements of what we have been taught or not taught to do with expressing grief that can have an effect on all of these aspects in our lives and have an impact throughout. Moving's another one. People don't really think about moving home as something that they're grieving, but if you've been in a house and you've had a family in it and you've grown up in it and then you move out of it, as much as you might be looking forward to where you're going to, there's also an element of leaving behind those feelings, even though you take them with you. But you know what I mean? That is the end of that period of your life in that home. You can have the same if you're moving from, across state, if you're listening in America, or in the case where I'm in the Isle of Man, people come here to work from the UK and they're leaving their friends and their family behind to come and set up over here. So while they may be excited to set up over here, they're leaving their friends behind. I can still remember too, moving up from primary school to high school, where you go from that little clique of people that's been around you, it's in your primary school, to being spread out in all the different classes in your high school. And that feeling of loss as I was sitting in that classroom on the very first day in high school looking around for a familiar face. So it can affect us in lots of little subtle ways in life, but that was the feeling. I was grieving the friends that I had grown up with. Finances. Well, we know that they can be a bit of a roller coaster in of themselves, and people get money, they lose money, people gamble. There's all sorts of things that go on around loss and finances, and that can be a little bit more relatable. But did you know at the point that you're grieving the loss of those finances? Just throwing it out there. Then we can talk about health. Well, we've talked about that and touched on it with my husband and his health. We went through a very stressful time when we were told that diagnosis, because they were told at the time there was nothing more that could be done for you. So we had to do what we could do to help the situation, which was to decide to not live our lives in fear, to make plans if anything happened, and get on with living our lives. But it took us 2 years to get to that point. It wasn't an easy ride at all, but we managed to do it. So if you've got issues around your health, then that there's an element of not being as fit as you were, and you're grieving. Pets. Now this one, some people don't think, who have no relationship with pets, that this comes under the category of, they just maybe think, what's wrong with you? It's just a cat or a dog. When those of you that may have followed me before know how important my dog Ruby is to me, and how much she's been a part of my healing journey after my husband. So it's going to be very much floodgates when she decides that she's no longer going to be here. So pets can be just as equally as important to us as people. And then there's careers. There's a lot of people that are made redundant, picked redundancy. They still leave friends behind when when they choose it. And then there's retirement, especially if somebody's had a high level job and all of a sudden they're just left to get on with life, and they're used to a team and work in a team, and there they are just floating adrift, as they say, in retirement. And that can be actually very painful. It can be a very painful loss for them, and fitting into finding what they can do in life can be quite challenging for them. And so we're coming to, just talk about again that grief, just to remind you, is it's just an emotion that we all do. And if we could understand that, it would empower you to know that, as opposed to something that you're trying to shove back down inside of you. Because you keep pushing down, and that lid of that box called grief, you put your foot in it, you've got your grandparents in there, you've got all the dogs in there and cats that you've loved and lost, and that lid really wants to shoot off. And then you might lose somebody like I do with my husband, and it came off. And so if we can open up and have these conversations, like the opportunity of this whole weekend is given to everybody to explore grief. It really should be taught in schools, this, to open up and talk about this, so that you can get tools, get the know-how to cope with these things when they arrive in our lives, because they are going to come. So as I've said about the attachment to whatever you've lost will depend on how much you will grieve. Let's move along now to myths and beliefs about grief. Now, we learn most of these from our parents because we're not taught it. So unless somebody has been good enough to sit down and have a conversation with you as a child, these things can become very, very difficult things in your adult life. And so when people start to have a conversation with you about somebody that's died, and I had a few very strange ones, this is the sort of thing that they might just say to you. Okay, so they say, don't feel sad. What else are you supposed to do? You just lost somebody you love, and then somebody's telling you not to be sad. What they're actually saying is, I can't actually stand to see you in this way. Please cheer up. I can't cope. Because that's about them and not you. So if you start to find yourself sort of, okay, I'll change the way I'm thinking, you're just pushing stuff back in your box. So let's not do that. If you feel sad, know that it's okay. It's normal. It's where you're supposed to be. Replace the loss. Okay, so let's talk about this one. When you have a child that's playing with a toy on the floor and the toy breaks, the parent comes dashing in with a biscuit because nobody likes to hear a child cry. Here, this will make you feel better. And so the child will take the biscuit. The higher authority has told the child that this will make you feel better. And so you start eating the biscuit. You feel different, but you don't feel better. And so then how that transcends into your life is that you're looking for your biscuit. How it can affect your life is those of you that have had one relationship after another, or you know friends that have had one relationship after another, and they seem to go into that relationship pretty quick. They're replacing a loss. And we all know that that's not a great way to be. And if a divorced person can, they possibly have had an affair before they've left the person because they don't even want to go into feeling any pain. So they're replacing the person before they move on. So this is how it can transcend down into something as simple as giving a child a biscuit to try and heal that pain of loss, instead of opening up to, let's have a talk about this. Now, if any of you have had children, you know that if you actually leave them, they will just grieve and finish that process and move on to the next toy because you've allowed it to be. So just, if you've got children, stop and think about that for the next time. The other thing is too about the animals. And this is another big one. When the child loses a hamster, for example, and you go and say, don't cry, don't be sad. I'll get you another one at the weekend, covering what we've just talked about. And so they'll go off and get this hamster. Now, they don't understand the relationship the child's had to Harry and can't understand why the child's not stopping to cry or still moping, and why they don't feel the same way about Henrietta. Because the relationship's not been there. It's actually a fabulous opportunity for you to sit down and have a conversation about grief. Ask the child, how are they feeling about their loss, and what was the relationship that they felt to their hamster? How much do they mean? Open up those conversations and allow the child to talk and process their loss in that way is giving them a tool. That's what we would really like for people to think about now going forward. If you understand the impact and the importance of those very early conversations, and you're giving them the coping strategies and the resilience that they'll need for that for the rest of their lives. Grieving alone. Now, in the book, the book we work from, the Grief Recovery Method, you can see one on the slide actually there. They tell a story of when one of the authors was a child at school. He was very close to his grandfather, and he came running in from school, and he was playing around with his friends, and they were having a great time. Next thing is the teacher arrives and tells him that his grandfather had died. Immediately, all his little friends came around him and started to comfort him. The teacher, being well-meaning, took the child and took him to a room and said, "You'll sit there until somebody comes and gets you." So he was taken away from the support he had with his friends and made to sit alone. Then when he got home, he came running in through the door, just wanting to give his mum a hug. And he was caught by a well-meaning adult and taken up to his room and said, "You need to sit here and just play with your toys for a bit. Mummy's just a bit busy at the moment." And all he wanted to do was give his mum a hug. So again, he was being shown that what you do when you're grieving is to be alone. So when it comes to how you yourself process that aspect, I personally, if I'm feeling sad, I will just let it go, because that's just who I am. I don't take myself necessarily away from anybody to do that. I did have to remove myself from the dog because she kept howling at me. She did not like to see me howling. So I would have to do and take myself away. So if you do feel that you need to have that space to allow yourself to cry, then that's fine. But please don't stay there. because it can lead to other things that might become an issue for you going forward, and that's not what any of us want. Let somebody know perhaps that you're going to go and have a good cry, and they can keep an ear out. And then, you know, if they feel that, you know, maybe you need to just check on you and make sure you're okay, that would be really, really a kind thing to do. But try not to grieve alone all the time, because it will just spiral you into depression. So if you can learn how to manage that, that would be really a useful tool for you. Right, time as a healer. This one really gets me, because if this was true, then why would I have clients that are 30 odd years on and they're still stuck in their grief? Time, the explanation that they've got in the book is a really one that I do love it. It's if you were driving a car and you had a puncture, you'd get out and you'd sit there and you'd say, and perhaps in a meditative pose, and say, right, okay, time as a healer, I will sit here and I will wait for the air to flow back into this tire and flow out again, and all will be well. Does it happen? No. You know you have to take that tire off, you have to fix the puncture, and you have to put it back on, and then put air back in it, and then you can go off on your journey. And your heart is no different. There is no amount of psychoanalyzing that will ever help you when it's your heart that's been broken. And that's where you need to go to help you heal. It's not about intellectualizing or anything like that in here. It's about what's going on in here. That part of you that's in pain and stuck and is struggling, that's the part that we need to work with you to help you release your hopes, dreams, and expectations of the future that you expect to have with that person. And especially in my case, we'd be making plans. But that's where I needed to go to heal, because physically I knew he was dead. Logically I knew he was dead. But that stabbing pain in my heart, that never left me until such times as I completed the Grief Recovery Method training. Be strong. How many times do you hear that one? And it was me. I was always the one that I'm right. Okay, I've got to look after my family. I've got to make sure everything's in alignment and make sure everybody's happy. And that was my role. I even used to have conversations with Andrew's doctors because he didn't want to do it. So there was lots of things like that I had to step up and do. And this wonderful nurse called Jane said to me, just before I went into intensive care to see him, she said, you don't have to be strong. And I said, but I do. That's my job. I need to make sure I know what everything's going on before I go in. And she reached out and she touched my knee and she said, it's time that somebody else looked after you. Well, that was me, wasn't it? I was just in floods of tears. But I felt this weight lift off of my shoulders. And I thought, she's right. I need to open up and I need to allow some other people to come in and help me right now. And that's what I did. So to be strong is not always a good thing, is it? We need to really think about, where are we in this process for ourselves? Keep him busy. God bless my mother. She's a classic one for this. She would have your house clean top to bottom, inside out, but not sit down and really talk about her grief. And there's an awful lot of people that will do an awful lot of things to distract other than sit with the uncomfortable feeling. The distraction techniques. I'm sure you've come across them. And as you think about that, how it goes through your life, that you will know when you've been doing it as well, won't you? Okay. And then we've got Academy Award recovery. That's when people are going, I'm fine. I'm okay. Don't worry about me. I'm absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine. Taking it in my stride. I know what I'm doing. It's fine. Or you have the ones that will go out on the town partying and they're thinking, wow, she's really bounced back. She's really recovered from this. And it's just an act. I had one friend, bless her, that had a relationship that ended badly. And the next thing is she's doing bungee jumping and throwing herself off rocks and abseiling and stuff like this. just like to get that adrenaline going, I suppose. But she was just, and you could just see, you're going to crash any minute. And sure enough, she did, bless her, because you cannot, instead of facing the grief and just putting up this wall, I'm okay. Don't you worry about me. I'm absolutely fine. Biggest fib you'll ever tell yourself. So when I do the program with people and I coach them through all of this, we're looking very much deeper at the language that we use and the things that we say to ourselves that keep ourselves stuck where we are, and what is said to us, because we can have some really crazy things said to us with the best will in the world. I did have somebody say to me, well, you're young enough to marry again. He's only gone 3 weeks, and somebody had actually thought it was okay to say that. I was like, really? Did you just say that? Or he's in a better place. No, the better place is here with me. But we all just sit there and go, yes, yes. Or we'll have that where people will actually say, well, how are you feeling? And I remember thinking, oh, fabulous. Somebody's actually asking me how I'm feeling. And I got about 2 minutes before they changed the subject because they realized I was telling them how I was feeling, and they weren't ready for that. So when I teach people the course, I'm teaching them these things, these tools and skills to help them, not just with their own loss, but also how to deal it with other people and how to help other people know what to say. I'll come on to that in a moment. So, okay, guilt. That is the common one, isn't it? Oh, I feel guilty because I wasn't there. Perhaps the person's bereaved. You weren't there at the actual moment of his death or her death, and you're holding on to that guilt, that feeling of guilt. So again, it comes down to the language and how that word is used. Guilt means to imply harm. So unless you put the pillow over the person's head, and therefore you are, obviously you're be involved with the police and everything, because you should be guilty. You've caused a murder. But otherwise, why are you feeling guilty? Is it really guilt? Or do you need to look beyond that? Well, I never got round to having that conversation with them. I never got round to telling them how much they mean to me. I wish I had done or said something. I wish I'd known more. I never knew he was that ill. And the feeling that those people have got is guilt. Now, it's just one of those words that we know that has been bandied around, but we really need to think about how we're using these words in this language, because that will keep you stuck. If you're going to stay in that space of saying you're guilty about something, you will stay stuck. So I work very hard at breaking that down with people and getting them to get to the reality of it, that they're not guilty, they just feel stuck or they feel sad. Academy Award recovery, we've covered. And that's what people tend to do, as I've mentioned. They tend to intellectualize the subject, or they start to talk about other things than your loss. They've come to see you, but they want to tell you that Betty up the road's had it far worse than you. You should be feeling a bit better about yourself now. She lost her husband when she was only 24. You're 52. What are you worried about? Come on. People will do this. What they will do is they will compare. You are a unique person living a unique life, and you need to unlearn how to compare yourself to anybody else, because we're taught that in schools, aren't we? You go and do your first spelling test and your mum says, how did you do? Oh, right, okay, only 6 out of 10, and that's not very good, is it? How did Susie do? Oh, she got 8 out of 10, did she? So automatically, these little things that we have gone through life are teaching us to compare ourselves to other people. You're unique. Don't compare yourself to anybody else. If you want to do anything like sport-wise, that's exactly what they do, isn't it? You look to see how you came, first, second, or third, or in my case, usually last. but it might be a PB for me. And that's what matters, is how I'm showing up, how I'm taking part in these things. So work on uncomparing yourself. I don't even know if that's a word. I've just probably made it up. But try not to compare. It will keep you stuck as well. And just because, the relationships that people have been completely different. So just because somebody else is further along and seem to be bouncing around and they're not quite in the same stuck place as you, doesn't mean to say even that they've moved on. It just means perhaps they've healed their pain. And that was a unique journey they had with that person. And now they've got a new person in their lives. But they're completely different relationships. STIRBs. Oh, my fun subject, STIRBs. Short-term energy relieving behaviours, the things that we can do to try and make ourselves feel better. Now, when Andrew died, he was in Liverpool, which is on what we call the mainland from our little island. And so on the weeks running up to this, my sister-in-law and my children and my brother-in-law came over, and we would have a meal out of a night because we had to eat, and it would be accompanied by a glass or two of red wine. Now, most often it would be maybe just a glass or two at the weekend for me, and that would be it. But this was going on every night. And then when he died, it continued. And then when I came back to the island, we had to wait for him to come about a week later because they had to bring the body over in a different way. But it continued. And people were bringing me bottles. They were bringing me cakes. They were bringing me all sorts of things. And I was just drinking it. I was even thinking, this doesn't make me feel the way it used to. I used to get like a hug from my little red wine, and I used to love that. It wasn't doing anything. And yet I was still drinking it, desperately trying to feel that hug. Then there was one Saturday night, probably about 3 weeks in to me doing this when I was back on the island. So about 5 after losing him, there was a Saturday night. I remember I was reclined and I was watching a movie for the first time, starting to feel like I could laugh again at something. And I realized there was like a voice that just sort of said, "What are you doing?" And suddenly I was brought into my awareness that I had then just opened my second bottle of wine. Shocked by thinking I heard something, but realizing what I was doing, I put the cap back on and I shoved it back in the cupboard and I said, right, that's it. I'm not drinking anything else again unless my girlfriends are around. And that's what I did to break that pattern. But you can easily see how that could have escalated into something far serious had I not had that in my awareness. So these things are called short-term energy relieving behaviors because we'd start to do them to try and make ourselves feel better. But there is also that worry that it might end up being a long-term one. People might overeat. They may stop eating. They may start exercising. They may start running on a treadmill and keep going like they're never going to stop. They could be getting lost in a fantasy on the TV so that they don't have to think about anything. So this is how the different things that people do to try and comfort themselves at that time. So I don't know if you can relate to any of that, but yeah, it was, when I think back, it was quite oh gosh, because it just wasn't who I was as a person at the time. So of course that brings us to, what to say to somebody when you're approaching somebody that has had a bereavement. Starting this conversation off can always be a bit tricky, but if you come to listen to that person, that will be the biggest gift you'll ever give them. What to say is, well, what happened? Can you tell me a little bit about it? And allow that conversation to open up. And know your job isn't to make them feel better, but you will help that if you can just not interrupt and just let them talk openly about how they're feeling right now and what's been going on. I can't imagine how painful, devastating, heartbreaking that has been for you. It's the truth, isn't it? Because you don't know. Because as I've said, we're all on unique journeys. So think about what this is just like little ideas to start a conversation off that you can have with somebody. But then once they start, just let them talk. You do not need to fix them. You will give them the comfort that they're looking for by giving them the space to just share. Okay? So never say, I know how you're feeling, because as I've explained to you, we're all unique and you don't. Or everything will be okay. Now, we know that life goes on and on and on, but at that point in time, they don't know how everything will be okay. And it'll take them maybe a long time on doing this kind of work to get to that place where they know that they will be, because they'll be in a different space with the grief, having done the work and on their pain of loss. They will start to feel different about that. But it is something that we carry with us. It's not something that you forget about. I remember when they put the grief recovery method on the board, and I thought, I hope they don't think I'm going to recover from 31 years of marriage, because that's not happening in that regard. And then the therapist in me was saying, right, the coach rather, was saying, it's parts language, Diane, it's parts. So I said to my colleague, they're talking parts here, aren't they? And she said, yes. We're talking about that pain that's in your heart, that pain part. That's the bit we're working on when we help you with the grief recovery method. Otherwise, I would never have done it, would I? Because there's no way. I loved my husband. We had 31 magical years together. It was a roller coaster. Don't get me wrong. It was all up and down and all the rest of it. We had, like I said, we had an awful lot to cope with and it was stressful at times. But I have an awful lot to be grateful for as well. And I have 2 wonderful sons from it. So that's that relationship. And so my new relationship that I have actually got this last 2 years, this is another unique relationship with a whole new different things. I will never have that with this one. So you can't compare, can you? So by saying that everything will be okay, never say that, I know how you feel, or everything will be okay, or anything that reinforces a myth that we've just touched on before. I don't feel sad, because that's exactly where they are going to be, and that could just, have them thinking, well, what am I supposed to be doing then? And they can be very offended by it, to be fair. And then so anything that's about you and not them, because that can be another distraction that you're trying to do to get them to shift from their pain of loss. It's all coming from a loving place. You want the best for these people. You love them. That's why you're there. That's why you've showed up. And just think about what I said about the distraction with the biscuit and the child. That's where this is coming into it as well. You're trying to distract them from where they're at and trying to cheer them up, because that's what friends do, cheer each other up. There is times when you just need to be the friend that sits there and listens and supports that way, and even ask them, what do they need? What do they want you to do? Especially if it's in the first throes of a bereavement. Because one of the things that you can't really do is string a sentence together. The dopamine that's dropped down in your brain to help the shock be absorbed by the body, we've got a fabulous body, puts us in another space and time to everything else that's going on around us. We have pockets and moments of clarity, and we need a lot of power naps. But it's great when you've got somebody that comes in and says, what can I do to help you? What do you need? And know that you can tell that person what you need. Open up to that and allow that to happen. So that is me. These are the common questions that I'm asked. What is the grief recovery program? Step by steps. Now, I wanted actual steps to help me with my recovery. So that's why this worked well for me. I didn't want to sit and wallow in this grief. I didn't like the energy that was there with grief. I needed to understand it more. And that's exactly what this program gave me. The times of the programs is generally 6 sessions, but I usually offer it in 8 because I do coaching alongside of it. And when is the right time to start a program is basically when you're ready. Unlike crews that want you to have about 6 months before you start anything, and then they just help you with the listening. I wanted something pretty soon after. Like I said, I was looking about 6 weeks afterwards. So it's when it's right for you, and that's the most important thing. And then when I've talked with people about it before, there's been this concern too that in doing the program, it'll be all consuming, and they'll have to give up the rest of their lives for the next 6 weeks while they do the program. And that's not what it's about. We try to work it in with the busy lives that everybody lives, so that you can get the best out of it and read the books and things that and do everything and ask the questions that you might have. So I'll just go over and see if anybody's got any comments. Let's have a wee look here. Yes. Hi, Ada. Yeah, moving from a lifetime home is very emotional. It certainly is. I'm back in my marital home, funnily enough, but I did leave it for a short period of time because my youngest son was moving in with his. He was expecting a family, but it didn't work out for him. So I kind of moved out, and then I've come back in again. And I think I needed to do that. I think I would have found life where I'm at now very difficult had I not had that short break. And I've come back in now, and I'm making it my own again. I'm making it a different house for me to live in. So I can't see that there's any other questions right now. But if you would like to find out a little bit more about me and my services, I do have a YouTube channel called Busting Life Challenges, because it's understanding that as you sort of think about now grief and how it's shown up in your life and the challenges that you've actually had, that these things can come to be, that you were grieving and you hadn't realized you were grieving, or there's been a loss that you didn't realize was a loss, and it can help people break through those sort of things pretty good. I've got a podcast channel, Busting Life Challenges, as well. You'll find some information on there. I've talked to an awful lot of people around the subject of suicide, and that's going to be the subject matter of some of the podcasts going forward, but also coaching and how important that is in our lives. And if these conversations can be started a lot sooner with a lot more people, I think we would find, you know, it would kind of balance things out a wee bit more for us, I think, to face these things rather than try and push them under the carpet. Hi Dee, thank you. You're welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And so I will hand back to the studio if there's no more questions for me at this point. I can't see anything in the comments. If anybody's got any questions that's watching, drop it into the chat, and then I can I'll answer it for you. But apart from that, I want to thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope you've managed to find something that you could take away with you going forward. Like I say, you can get in touch with me, or my website is www.lifeafterlotiom.com. And I would love to have a chat with anybody that has any questions, who wants to do it perhaps a little bit more privately. It's a very personal subject, but as with most people that are showing up this weekend to help you, we want to make this something that everybody will talk about and open up to, and not fear in the conversations going forward. So thank you very much. Oh, thank you, Bob. That's great, that Dee. Thank you so much for letting me know that. So and I wish everybody that's taking part in this conference the very best of luck. I will be popping in and listening to a lot of them over the weekend, and I can't wait. Thank you to everybody that's put this on for us, and for you to learn more about your grief. But for now, I think that is me. I think I will go back to the studio. Thanks very much.